capture you within my heart. He has an interesting story that he was actually earlier in his life very much engaged in like baser activities. And so he used to regularly visit a prostitute by the name of Chintamani. And so one time his father passed away, but he couldn't resist going to her. So somehow he crossed this really terrible river. He got on a dead body and floated and somehow got to her house. And when she saw him, instead of being happy, Chintamani actually chastised Bilva Mangal Thakur and told him basically that, what kind of a person are you? If you were as attached to the pursuit of the absolute truth as you are attached to this body made of skin and bones, you would have attained the absolute truth by now. So when Bilva Mangal Thakur hears that, he is completely awakened as if from a slumber, and he rushes off, and the rest is history. He goes off to Vrindavan and becomes this great teacher. But what is interesting is that Bilva Mangal Thakur in his writings, whenever he writes, he would always give credit to this prostitute as being his instructing spiritual master. So this shows the importance of a teacher or a guru who actually guides or shows us the way.
So today we are going to talk about this special teacher who came to bring this Krishna Bhakti in a time when you could not imagine how people would even understand this philosophy. He transplanted this seed of Bhakti from India to this part of the world where this concept was very foreign. So for those of you who are going to do the recap, right?
Yeah, we'll just quickly do a recap because I just wanted to make a point that this section that we are studying is actually a culmination of two sections. So remember in the third chapter we talked about spiritual leadership, right? And at that time we were supposed to have this section, which we did not. And then day before we talked about disciplic succession. So this section kind of brings together those two ideas, spiritual leadership as well as a disciplic succession.
So let me turn up the music. So for those of you who missed it yesterday, we just want to do a 5-minute recap of what we did yesterday. So we talked about how to get knowledge, or how do people get knowledge. And there are three primary ways of getting knowledge: sense perception, like by obtaining knowledge through our senses, it's called pratyaksha. But the problem with that is that our senses are imperfect, we make mistakes, we often get into illusion, and then despite having these three defects, we have a tendency to cheat. And the second way of getting knowledge, which is hard to obtain through senses, is then using our mind to conjecture or speculation. But the problem there is imperfect mind and prior biases often distort the knowledge that we get. And the third one is getting the knowledge about a subject from the expert, and it's called Shabda or expert. Especially spiritual knowledge, one can get from the expert, and because it is reliable and it saves us time and energy, because there are truths which are beyond our mind and our senses, and no matter how hard we try, we cannot really get them through our mind and senses. So one has to depend on experts. So let's see. So we won't be able to go through the videos again, but this Umwelt factor, this scientist explains that how our sense of our perception range is very limited. So therefore our perception of reality is very limited, right? Because we cannot see ultraviolet, infrared, and so many other spectrums of radiation. Even our different senses, they are limited. So because of that, our perception of reality is very limited. So we cannot say for certain that what we are perceiving is the reality, and this is called like a Umwelt factor. And also the logic is when we depend on, because in today's day and world, the whole paradigm of scientific investigation is dependent on logic. But logic is also limited because it is based on our prior perception of what we have perceived, and when that doesn't match with our current perception, then the logic also fails. So here in this experiment, you will see that the scientist created a box where humans can enter, and he had designed it in such a way that our mind and our senses, they are not in congruence with each other. So the mind is perceiving something, but the senses are watching something. Each sense is perceiving the reality in a different way, and it completely throws off the person, and the logic basically fails. And this is another defect with speculation, is that each person is having again using their mind, but the senses are not, they're only using a particular sense, because they are all blind. These 6 blind people perceiving the elephant from different places, and they all come up with a different conclusion, and that shows the defect of speculation. So they have to actually find somebody who actually can see, and they can explain that it is not a snake, it is not a spear, it is not a fan, it's not a rope, but it is an animal called elephant. And this is a story of a Dr. Frog who is visited by a guest from Atlantic Ocean, and then the Dr. Frog in the well, he's asking him how big is the Atlantic Ocean, and the visitor says it's very big, and the Dr. Frog cannot imagine. He says, this big, 5 times bigger than this well, 10 times bigger than this well, and he keeps pumping up his body, 100 times bigger than this well, and finally he bursts. So this is kind of shows our situation when we are trying to perceive, especially spiritual reality, which is beyond this well of material realm. Then we have to actually depend on somebody who's coming from that realm. And this whole Richard Dawkins, he talks about here how we need to depend on experts, because lately there's like people feel that I don't need an expert, I can just figure it out, especially spiritual knowledge, I can just figure it out on my own. But he says that we need experts in all walks of our life. Just like if we have medical problem, then we want the expert or elite surgeon. If we want to get good education, then we want to go when we want to send our child or ourselves to a good elite college. So in every aspect of life, we are looking for experts to get what we are looking for. So why not in the spiritual realm as well? And this is where the Shabda Brahman comes in, that the spiritual knowledge is coming from the higher realm, from Supreme Supreme Lord himself, and that is impregnated into Lord Brahma, who is the first living being. And as Sabda Brahma is impregnated into the Muladhara chakra of Brahma as Paravak, its transcendental sound, and then from that it rises above through the different chakras of Brahma, and finally it comes out from the mouth of Brahma as Vaikari Vak, and that's when it's called the Vedas. So the Vedas are just a visible manifestation of this Paravak that Brahma is impregnated by Krishna. So the whole and then we talked about how this knowledge is then transferred from one disciple to the other. So Brahma will instruct it to his disciple Narada, and from Narada to the next in the chain. So through a chain of personalities who are all transcendentally absorbed, this knowledge is passed. And this concept is not foreign, because in India, before the trains and all this modern communication came about, and there used to be mail runners who used to take mail from one city to the other, and or town to the other, and they were very expert runners, but at the same time they would make sure that they did not lose the mail. And in many cases, if they were attacked by a tiger or some other wild animal, many would be so brave that they would actually, before dying, they would pass it on to the next guy. So there are some cases like that, and that's the whole concept of this disciplic chain that we are going to talk about, that every link in the chain passes the knowledge as it is. As Prabhupada is saying here, that this is not his message. So the spiritual knowledge is not somebody that they can create from their own mind. He says it's the message of Krishna. I have not manufactured this message. I am imperfect, but I am presenting this perfect message. That is my business. I don't say I am perfect. I am simply a carrier peon and just passing it on to the next guy.
And then we talked about this idea of how this knowledge grows. So in one of our texts, Bhakti text, it is described, this whole parampara system is described as a tree, which starts with a little seed, but then it grows into so many branches. And the idea is that the branch that is not connected to its source will actually wither and dry away. And the same way with parampara system, that if a person is not connected to the root, which means that is not, there's lack of fidelity and is not true to the system, then the empowerment will actually stop. So there is just a quick point there. There is a check and balance system, because this is a question that many people have, that how do we trust? So there is a check and balance system. So one check, of course, is that if one is not connected, then there is no empowerment for that person to actually be able to do things. Just like if you plug an appliance into the plug point, you know that it's working because the appliance will work because it's connected to its source, right? And then also there is the other check and balance system of bringing in the books. So whatever the guru speaks has to be in accordance with the books.
So this is the other aspect of how transmission happens. Electricity, we have transformers step up and step down to transfer the electricity without any loss, so it can reach a similarly. The spiritual knowledge is transmitted through these great teachers who are like the transformers. And also in crime, the chain of custody is maintained. We looked at this chain, human chain to save a dog who was drowning in a canal. So today we are going to start with and how Brahma is the first link in the chain, from whom this knowledge is revealed to him, and then from it is passed down. So in our Vaishnava or this spiritual circle, the knowledge, Krishna starts these 4 chains to transmit this knowledge, and he chooses these 4 personalities, Brahma, Lakshmi, Shiva, and the 4 Kumaras, to start these 4 sampradaya. They're called sampradaya, which means it provides complete knowledge.
So they're sort of like 4 schools. So if I want to go to school, and if I know that the school is accredited, then I can expect, not necessary, but it's at least some level of comfort knowing that these schools are accredited. So these are 4 schools that was started by Krishna himself, and each of these schools have some prominent teachers. And so today we will try and see. So our chain that we are teaching through is actually this Brahma school. And the interesting thing is that each one of us who are students right now and we are studying this, we also have the potential of becoming a chain, a link in that chain.
And we are a link in the chain because as long as we follow it and preserve the knowledge, then we can pass it on to somebody else. So in the Brahma's chain, the prominent teachers were Acharya, Lord Chaitanya, and now recently Prabhupada. In the Lakshmi chain, it's called Sri Sampradaya, and the prominent teacher there was Acharya. He appeared in around 800 AD in India, and that Sampradaya is still very active.
In South India.
South India, most of the prominent temples there are followers of Ramanuja. And the third Sampradaya is Rudra Sampradaya, or Lord Shiva Sampradaya. And Vishnu Swami, who appeared in, again, maybe more than 1,000 years ago, he was the prominent Sampradaya. And the Vallabhacharya Sampradaya is part of this Rudra Sampradaya. And Kumara Sampradaya, so is the prominent teacher is Nimbarkar. And not all the sampradayas may be active or prominent at a certain time. Some sampradayas become prominent at one time and then they diminish and things like that. So it goes on. Right now, the Brahma Sampradaya is very prominent.
Another very important key aspect of this Sampradaya system is that they also are able to figure out what's relevant. So a story that is told by Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati is that sometimes, people become very attached to old ideas. And so even though the Ganga has changed its course, people will still go to the old, like where there's no longer the Ganga flowing. And they'll still insist that I have to take a bath here because Ganga used to flow here. So this is actually another important aspect of this disciplic chain, that because of their fidelity to the roots, they are also able to adjust to the environment. But both are there. There is a progression as well as there's a rootedness to the core practices and the principles.
It's like a palm tree which can bend in a hurricane and doesn't topple down. So this is a beautiful prayer that describes,
So here is another point, that what actually constitutes, what is so special about these teachers who are able to transmit, because we talked about these male runners, right? So one of the quality is that when they meet with an obstacle, how do they respond? And if you remember when we were studying 2nd chapter, Arjuna actually asked Krishna, what are the symptoms of a sthita pragya or someone who is transcendental? And one of the quality is that, they're always in absorption and they're constantly taking shelter of the source or of the Supreme Lord. So here, this is a poem where when a river is actually flowing, when it flows over the mountains or it flows over the plains, it has the ability to encounter and meet all challenges. And I think Ankur also asked a question right now about how to stay in equilibrium. So when the river meets a desert, then it starts to dry out and it realizes that it cannot really flow on its own strength. So this is a beautiful poem. We'll read it and then we'll share the implication of it. Should I read it? A young river So strong, nothing could stop it. Nothing went wrong.
It's going too fast.
Just 1 second. Just stop it. Nothing could stop it. Nothing went wrong. Big rocks in its way, no problem at all. It went over them, around them, if tall. But then it met the desert. Water sank deep into sand. Huge problem for the river. It looked like its life was to end.
Desperately it turned to our God. Please, God, help me to get away from or over this spot.
A voice from above said, "Look at the wind in the sky. It crosses the desert so easily, so just stop to cry."
But I am not wind, I am water. How can I cross? Please help me, I am at a loss.
"Did you forget, dear river," said the voice from above. "Long time before you were a river, the wind carried you with love."
The river let its water evaporate, allowed the wind to allowed
No, you have to go back.
allowed the wind to carry it once more in its loving arms. Wind held the river as before.
Across the desert they went, a lot of water in a big large cloud, and at the other side the wind let it rain out. There the river again became strong, even better and stronger than before. With much vigor it ran for everyone to adore.
So I think
Yeah.
let's stop it here.
So the idea being that, this is actually the nature of a transcendental spiritualist. And a teacher, a real teacher, is someone who knows or who is constantly taking shelter of the Supreme Teacher.
And that we can see in the life of Prabhupada that before him, so many teachers tried to bring this knowledge to the Western world, but they could not. And then Prabhupada, he like the wind, he carried this knowledge across the 7 oceans and then brought it here
Such a
and let it rain here.
Let it rain here, yeah. And it is, actually before Prabhupada brought here, it was inconceivable. And people would think, how is it possible for this knowledge of bhakti to actually be transplanted in the West? And so he did this because of his ability to take shelter of the wind.
So this process of bhakti is basically standing upon the shoulder of giants. And this is what Newton realized.
So on our own strength, we can only see so far. But we can attest to it, that, because of the writings of these teachers, we find that everything gets magnified. The mercy gets magnified, the understanding gets magnified, right?
And we don't have to spend our time researching whether this is true or not. We can just work on ourselves. So this is like the unbroken chain that we are going to talk about today. And how it comes from Krishna and all these different teachers, starting from Krishna, Brahma, Narada, Vyasa, Madhava. These are all teachers whose life have been documented. Their teachings have been, from most of them, have been preserved. And one can actually see that the magnificent thing about this chain, unbroken chain, is that each one of them is not trying to supersede the previous teachers or not trying to excel them, but they are humbly following or presenting the teachings of the previous teachers in that spirit of devotion and the spirit of submission, but at the same time they are presenting it according to the time, place and circumstance, making it relevant. So in that chain you can see, like for example Madhava, number 5, he appeared like around 1200 AD. So all the other teachers, they have appeared after that in the last 800 years. And you can actually find manuscripts handwritten by some of them even now.
And Vyasa, of course, is the person, number 4, is the person who has actually compiled all of these Vedas. So all of these Vedas, before 5,000 years, were all in an oral tradition. That is the way Vedic tradition was transmitted. But Vyasa, understanding the nature of this age that we live in, decided to actually put everything down. So
we'll look at some of the prominent links, how this transmission happened. And Krishna, first of all, gives this knowledge to Brahma in his Mooladhara chakra as transcendental sound, and then Brahma realizes the Vedas and then he speaks the Vedas.
Actually, even before that, Brahma actually appears on a lotus, because he's the first created being in this universe, and so he doesn't know what's going on with him, because all he sees around him is darkness and the waters of devastation. So he tries to find out the source of his existence by going up and down the lotus stem, and he realizes not possible. And then he he hears the two syllables tapa, starts to meditate, and then Krishna reveals this knowledge to him within the heart through the Gayatri mantra.
And Brahma's son Narada, he once asked him that, I see you meditating, is there, I thought you were the supreme, but is there somebody superior to you? And then Brahma reveals this knowledge to him, that the whole Vedic knowledge, that how there is somebody superior to him, and that is Krishna, how he comes from Krishna, and the whole story. So this knowledge is passed as it is to Narada, and Narada, being a great teacher himself, he travels throughout the universe playing his musical instrument called Veena, and he has great disciples all over the universe, like Prahlad and Dhruva and pretty much all the great personalities like Vyasadeva. We'll see how.
Actually, just on that note, also wanted to make this point that just like what we heard yesterday from this neuroscientist about having a very narrow window of cognition, so some of these things that we are talking about might seem fantastic. That how is it possible? How does he travel? So, but we have to understand that these dimensions that are being talked about, these dimensions are not our normal, dimensions of our cognition.
And neither the bodies of these personalities are like made like our bodies.
Yeah. So this is a truth that is beyond the normal, concept that we have. So.
And for example, just like our mind. Our body cannot go somewhere, but our mind can go to the place where our body cannot go, right? So we can see how mind can travel without any limitation. So if you have a body like that, then we can travel.
Yeah, just like I was thinking that our bodies cannot live in water, right? But the body of a fish can live in water. So same way, there are bodies which are more subtle, like the virus. Doesn't really have a gross body, right? But it's still a living entity. So same way, Lord Brahma's body is made up of intelligence. He doesn't have a gross body. But what we tend to do is we look at his body and we go, oh, man with four heads, how is that possible? But he doesn't have a gross body, right?
And Narada is the teacher of Vyasa, and we'll read in Bhagavatam that how Narada gives the teachings to Vyasa, and Vyasa at some point is feeling very depressed about his writings, and he feels that he hasn't done a complete job, and Narada then instructs him to write the Srimad Bhagavatam, which is the pinnacle of Vyasadev's work. So we can see how this knowledge is passed from a guru to a student.
And then Vyasa, in turn, instructs Madhava.
He instructs many personalities, but Madhava is a prominent teacher in that line. He appeared around 1200 AD, and Vyasadeva, he instructed him and gave him this knowledge. And from Madhava Acharya, there is a series of disciples. We looked in the list, and then from that came another prominent teacher called Madhavendra Puri, who started this chain of this sampradaya. He's kind of how do you describe that?
So he basically introduced, as we talked about this yesterday, that there are two ways to approach the Supreme Person, right? One is in the mood of reverence and awe, and that is generally the sort of what most people know when they're approaching. But Madhavendra Puri for the first time introduced this idea of loving God in a very intimate and sweet way, and introduced the sweetness part, which is a very confidential aspect of bhakti, because like we described, it is God being in his most intimate and playful and most approachable manner, which is sort of hidden even from the Vedas. So he introduced that. And then came this great personality, and in fact, for the longest time we've been wanting to speak about him, which is Lord Chaitanya. So Lord Chaitanya is actually, so Krishna, sometimes he's all-knowing, but there is one thing that he himself is not able to understand, which is how does a sugar know its own sweetness? So Krishna sits there wondering that what is it about me that Srimati Radharani, who is his spiritual counterpart and is also the deity or the goddess of bhakti, what is she experiencing when she's loving me? And Krishna desires to actually understand or taste that sweetness of himself. So then he appears as Lord Chaitanya. Also, he understands that Kali Yuga is a time which is not an easy time for most of us. Well, we can see that right now, right? So he understands that all the previous methods of self-realization are not going to help people in this age. So he comes to inaugurate this process of bhakti, which is very simple and accessible to the common person.
And here we see him instructed Rupa Goswami, who was one of his prominent disciples, and he gives him the complete knowledge of bhakti and this transcendental science. And Rupa Goswami wrote voluminous literature, and through that and his disciples, and through his disciples now we have received this knowledge.
I also wanted to just go back and make another point that when Lord Chaitanya arrived on the scene, the other thing that he also dismantled was this very strong, all of this knowledge was kind of locked up in the ivory chambers of
Brahmanas.
Brahmanas, and they had sort of like this, they felt that this knowledge belonged to them, and in order for someone to actually be part of a spiritual culture, you have to be born in the family of Brahmana. So Lord Chaitanya actually came and broke that container and said, no, it's for anyone without any regard to what one's gender is, or what one's
Social status
social
is.
status or economic status, including anyone and everyone within its fold. So that is also another of Lord Chaitanya's contribution.
And further down the chain came Bhaktivinoda Thakur, who's a very special guru and teacher, because after Lord Chaitanya, about 200 or 300 years passed, and this knowledge again seemed to be lost, and people started looking at bhakti as like a very low form of, or people with no morals practicing bhakti, because there are some kind of bad elements who kind of they started practicing bhakti, or they practice bhakti in sentimental manner, mixing sense gratification with bhakti. So as a result, intelligent people started thinking that bhakti is something that is not for moral people or thinking intelligent people. So that was the image of bhakti at that time. This was like in the 19th century, and Bhaktivinoda Thakur, who was so brilliant that he was appointed as a magistrate by the British government, and he basically turned the whole thing around. He wrote voluminous literature to prove to people of India that how bhakti is such a sophisticated and logical and practicable science. And he sent books all over the world in libraries, and he prayed for a son that who could propagate or carry on this mission. So his son Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur was born, and who was again it's like a son. He was his knowledge and his devotion laid the foundation for the bhakti movement to pass on further.
So we'll just, so here we wanted to talk because today is Prabhupada, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada's appearance day. So, it's like we just wanted to give you a sense of, that Prabhupada does not stand alone. He stands as a representative of this lineage that goes 5,000 years and beyond, from the beginning of time. And Prabhupada would often talk about how he was simply a peon who was, carrying this message across space and across time. Across space in the sense that this knowledge was confined to the geographical boundaries of India, and time as well, that he's carrying this timeless message. And so he had a great responsibility, and this was actually the desire of all the previous teachers. So there are different missions or different projects. So one of the project that Lord Chaitanya had 500 years ago was this desire that this knowledge should go beyond India and then go to every town and every village all over the world.
He actually proclaimed that this knowledge will spread all over the world, and everybody used to think that how is that going to be possible? I mean, how will people who are not familiar with this Vedic culture, how will they take to it?
So Prabhupada, so they kept thinking. In fact, many people just thought that it was just a beautiful poetic way that Chaitanya had spoken. And then when Prabhupada came, he received this directive from his teacher. In his first meeting, Bhaktisiddhanta told him that he should travel and he should, take this message to the Western world. And Prabhupada, at the age of 69, he actually got on a cargo ship called Jaladuta, which means literally a messenger of God. Jaladuta means a messenger on the seas.
Yeah, he didn't have any money to take a flight ticket, so he visited this owner of a cargo company in Mumbai and requested her, sat outside her office for many, many days and requested her that please allow me to go to America. But she's going to speak here.
Yeah, so let's watch this, and then I think that we should come back to later. So this is a little, there are some documentaries that have been made. We obviously cannot watch the entire documentary, but this is a trailer, so this will give you a little insight
in the biography of Prabhupada.
Oh no. Krishna, Krishna, Hare Hare. A hypnotic rhythmic chant of 16 words has replaced LSD. On 2nd Avenue and 1st Street is a storefront in which a Hindu Swami has set up shop.
Traditionally, Swamis, yogis, and masters all moved uptown to the Red
He was Bhaktivedanta, like in the depths of Calcutta.
Swami Bhaktivedanta, he once said that he was the servant of the servant of the servant of God.
Everyone is thinking, I'm American, I'm Indian, I'm European, I'm Australian. I'm not this boy. I'm feeling so.
The young people were not satisfied. They were looking for
This
something
is our
more.
spiritual teacher.
To find out what is the truth.
The age of 70, Srila Prabhupada just left everything that was known to him.
He said, I want to go to America. I said, are you crazy? Well, man, you are going to die.
He was fearless and he was bold. He did not give up his dream. He had this one spirit, one calling in his heart. If someone told you the story, you wouldn't believe it.
So I went to America alone.
All by himself, a trunk of books, 40 rupees. It was impossible. But Srila Prabhupada had faith. Prabhupada had a vision for the world from day one. He wanted to embrace the world.
We really encourage you if, oh, I'm sorry.
Boston, on the 17th of September 1965.
So if, we really encourage you. If you guys, anyone is interested in watching the documentary, we can actually send you a link. It's on Amazon Prime, right? Amazon, yeah. So you can actually watch the documentary. It's the most inspiring. I mean, it's like seeing the Bhagavad-Gita
In action.
in action. You can really see, what one person who makes a deep spiritual commitment, how they can actually change the world. And the most, there are sociologists and historians who actually study this, and they say that it's an impossible task. At the age of 70, to try and come to a culture where he had never seen snow before. He had never been on a flight. He didn't know anything about the Western culture. He came from a very, very traditional aristocratic Bengali family, and for him to transplant this entire culture, and not just with people who were of a good background. These were people who were dropouts, drug addicts, hippies, and they were living in the Bowery. So it's quite an astonishing feat, and we'll see how. No, let's go forward. I think we'll come back to the.
So this is what we talked about. He came on the ship. He had 2 heart attacks while on the way, and he was praying to Krishna that if I have a 3rd heart attack, then I'm not going to survive. And Krishna gave him the strength to come to America, and this is his quality that we can appreciate how he wanted to carry out the order of his guru. His guru asked him to come to America or the Western world and preach share this message. And Prabhupada, he did not give up. He could have turned back and gone back, but he did not do that.
There's a very beautiful prayer that he wrote. So this is a big arduous journey. Like we can see that at this age, he had all he came with to America was a trunk full of Srimad Bhagavatam. That's all he had, and money which was like worth $8, which also he could not use. And that's all, and that too at the age of 69. And so, but the interesting thing is that he knew that what he was he could see, like, so there was this one time when he was even homeless in Bowery, right? But he was sitting on this bench, and there was this person who was he was like he used to clean around that area, right? So he was talking to Prabhupada, and Prabhupada said that I have all these temples and thousands of disciples, and this big international society. And at the time, Prabhupada had nothing. And he said, only time is separating me from it. So just like we talked about, spiritual leadership. So this is actually the meaning of spiritual leadership, is this confidence which stems from deep faith and deep conviction.
Yeah, he always said that I never felt alone. I always felt that my teacher, my spiritual teacher, is always with me and giving me the strength, because he was very lonely at that time. He didn't have anybody
When he
as a-
wasn't lonely, he was alone.
he was alone.
Yeah.
He was alone, and he didn't have anybody to help him or support him. But he was laying the foundation for this great movement.
By the way, the tree, he would sit under this tree and he would chant. And, he didn't have a drum or anybody to support him. He would write letters back India, but nobody was interested. In fact, before coming to America, he actually tried very hard to speak to Indians at the time. But in India at that time, there was a great desire for Western modernity. And so people in general were not so inclined. And so Prabhupada, when he came here, he struggled alone for a long time and was attacked. He was homeless. He was attacked by, a person who was on drugs. So it's quite when you see that kind of determination, then it just really, it is most inspiring.
And this is the picture of his first storefront center. And because he was first living with this drug addict called David, and one day David freaked out, and then Prabhupada had to leave that place. And he was on the streets basically. And then he calls Mukunda Goswami, who's our spiritual teacher, and then he finds him this storefront for rent, and then he also rents the apartment behind this storefront. So this is where the first temple or center for the Hare Krishna movement started, and ironically it was called the storefront was called Matchless Gifts.
And to this day, you can actually visit this place
in New York.
And it's just this tiny place where, and Prabhupada in this place would single-handedly, he would cook and he would feed everyone, and then they would just leave the dirty dishes. And one day, after a long time, somebody finally asked Prabhupada, can we help? So here is a person of such great spiritual stature who was willing to put himself in this situation. And he will watch this, how he has been acknowledged by, great scholars. And this scholar in particular was there at the time when Prabhupada was there at the storefront. We'll see his realization when he first.
This is that storefront.
This is that storefront.
Sometime in the spring of 1967, people handed me clippings from New York newspapers saying that there was a Swami in New York City. So I went to New York to look up this person and his movement. My first contact was with disciples apart from Bhaktivedanta Swami, and I was frankly somewhat disappointed by the disciples. They seemed to be not very informed about what they were doing. They were unclear about the whole thing, and yet they were terribly serious and terribly devoted to what they were about. And I couldn't put those two pieces together, their confusion, uncertainty on the one hand, and their commitment on the other, until I met Bhaktivedanta Swami. And as soon as I met him, which was after several visits to the temple, I realized that this was the person who really made the whole thing go. But the impressive thing about it was never himself in the center. He never said, you should do this because of me. He always said, you should do this, and I should do this because of Krishna. When he gave them instructions to do what they thought were impossible things, like he told one of the early disciples, go start a magazine. The guy had never had any contact with a magazine before in his life except to read one. And he said, how am I to do that? And Bhaktivedanta Swami said, Krishna will help you. He was just astonishing in terms of the personal impact that he had on people, the way that he was able to give them confidence in themselves, but more importantly, give them confidence that there was a guide who was leading them and would give them the strength that they needed.
Bhaktivedanta Swami does not belong to New York. He belongs to Krishna.
We can start here.
So when a few of his followers invite him to San Francisco, he goes and introduces the freewheeling youth to Krishna.
Let's start here.
His
This
ancient
is a
culture.
very beautiful documentary, and we watched this so many times, and it still makes our heart, fill with happiness. And hopefully one day we'll watch it together.
It's called Your Ever Well Wisher. You can find it on YouTube, and it's an hour-long documentary.
It's very, very nice. So we see here that, we talked about spiritual leadership, right? So we want to also bring in those points because it was connected to that discussion at the time, that spiritual leadership means being able to empower others. A true leader is someone who can see the complete potential in others and be able to draw out that potential. And so when Prabhupada would see someone, he could see that this person, because of great faith, could actually become something else. And there were stories over stories of people. There's one, this is kind of crazy, but there was this one person who was so out of it, I guess, that he used to actually urinate in the corridors of the temple. And he was so disheveled and just completely, I don't know. And so the disciples went and complained to Prabhupada, and they said that, what do we do with him? And Prabhupada said, you cannot tolerate. And then this person later went on to become one of a very big scholar in Sanskrit.
Yeah, he had exceptional abilities with language, and then he could study. He was a master of many languages, and he translated so many of the ancient books into English. Kushakatha.
Should we tell the story of Pigpen? Oh, I love that story. So there is a story that is one of our favorite stories about this. So this was in Paris when Prabhupada visited there. Then the disciples would actually go go for a morning walk, and on the way there was this homeless person who was, just completely shaggy, and he had not taken a bath for the longest time, and he used to live in a bush. He had dug a hole, and he put some newspaper there, and he would just basically live there. And so every time when Prabhupada would go for a walk, he would just jump out of the bushes. And let's get off the stop share so I can see people. And so he would just kind of get off those bushes and jump into the, and try to grab Prabhupada. And so the disciples would sort of push him back again. And so this went on for a couple of days. And one day, when they came back from their morning walk, they saw that the door of the temple was open. And they thought, what's that strange? And they went in and they saw that here was this homeless person who had entered the temple. And so they were really not happy because this guy really smelled, and they didn't know what kind of person he was. They used to just call him Pigpen, and so they wanted him to leave. And this person, he just went off to Prabhupada and he just held Prabhupada very tightly, and he started crying. And so Prabhupada just sort of put his hand on Pigpen's head and said, it's all right, it's all right. He kept sobbing. And so when the devotees saw that, Prabhupada was being so kind, they couldn't ask him to go. So then Prabhupada said, okay, now take him upstairs, give him a good scrub, wash him, give him new clothes. And so they did that to this person. And so the devotees thought, all right, we'll do that. Next morning, Pigpen is out. And so Pigpen had difficulty speaking. So he could never really make coherent speech. So next morning, when they asked Pigpen to leave, Pigpen said, no, I'm not going anywhere, like he just indicated. So again, Prabhupada said, let him stay. So, Pigpen started finding odd jobs to do around the temple and so on and so forth. Now, in the meantime, this story is narrated by Indradyumna Swami. They used to go and every morning and go and meet people and tell them about the Bhagavad-Gita. So one day when Maharaj got into this van, he saw that Pigpen had also joined, he also wanted to go. And Maharaj said, no, I'm not taking, in his mind, he thought, I'm not taking him. But Pigpen insisted that, no, I want to go as well. So they said, all right, you come along, but just stay quiet, because just stay in the van. Just stay in the van, because there's no way he could speak, and he was still not, So anyways, they get in there, and as soon as they come to a place, they see that Pigpen has a bag of books, and he just rushes out. And there's only one word that Pigpen knows how to say, and that is, Prabhupada saved me. That's all he can say. And so he goes around and just keeps telling people that Prabhupada saved me, and he hands them a Bhagavad-Gita. And before long, he has actually been able to touch so many people's lives, and people are just receiving these books from him because of his, deep, genuine faith and happiness. So this person actually went on to become a great teacher, and he became, in the whole of Europe, I believe, he later got initiated, and he also became a person who impacted the lives of so many people. So this is actually the potency of the disciplic succession that Prabhupada was carrying, right? The ability to transform the lives of so many people. Hey, how nice to see you. Our favorite people.
Namaste. Namaste. Meera, so good to see you.
So good to see you.
Thank you for the wonderful lesson.
So this is another quality of Prabhupada, that he never took credit for the wonderful things he did. Whenever somebody would ask him, he said, I'm just like a puppet, and everything is actually being done by Lord Krsna.
Before we do this, we should recite this prayer that he wrote. So when he got on the Jaladutta, and he was the Jaladuta finally arrived in Boston, he wrote a prayer, and he ends that prayer by saying that, let's see, I'm just getting there. So he says that, how will I make them understand this message of Krishna consciousness? I am very unfortunate, unqualified, and the most fallen. Therefore, I'm seeking your benediction so that I can convince them, for I'm powerless to do so on my own. Somehow or other, you have brought me here to speak about you. Now, my Lord, it is up to you to make me a success or failure as you like. Oh Lord, I'm just like a puppet in your hands. So if you have brought me here to dance, then make me dance, make me dance. Oh Lord, make me dance as you like. So this idea, this is another attribute of true spiritual leadership or empowered leadership, that
or any kind of leadership. Yeah, it doesn't. The leader doesn't want to take credit because he knows that he's receiving his strength from above and also from everybody around him.
So let's watch this, and then. Do you remember? Do you remember? Need to fast forward, not fast forward.
Cannot think.
Prabhu, it is not shared.
Not shared?
Not shared.
Oh, sorry. Thank you. So the idea being that we always have to know who is our puppeteer, right? And become this puppet. And when the when the glorification comes our way, then a true leader actually doesn't take the credit for himself, and in that way always stays humble, right? So that's a very important attribute, and we can definitely see that in the life of Prabhupada. And then we'll go back to the beginning where we'll talk about. It also shows the whole Bhagavad-Gita. This is something that we have often talked about when we meet people for the first time, that how one person, it's Margaret Mead, I think, who said, right, that it's only a small group of people, a small group of committed people can actually make a difference in the world. And we see that in the life of Prabhupada, that one person who is spiritually committed and who is living a principle-centered life can actually impact, the whole world. So we'll see.
And Newsweek ran an article about Prabhupada, how on late bloomers, and they picked some of the late bloomers around the world, and Prabhupada was one of them, as how he started out very late in his life at the age of 70, and then $7 in his pocket, and he created basically a movement which was worth millions of dollars in terms of monetary value, but in terms of impact on the society and the humanity, there was no calculation.
So by the way, he toured the globe 14 times in 11 years, and he wrote more than 70 books. By the way, this is another quality of a leader, that he is willing to endure great sacrifices. So during the day, he would work very hard at establishing this movement, and at night he would actually spend the night translating these books.
All night long, you just translate these books. The Bhagavatam itself is like 18,000 verses. Even to write the essay, you can imagine how much time it takes us to write.
What about writing? What about reading?
Yeah, even reading, right? Even reading.
Just to read his books, one lifetime is not enough. So what to speak of writing all of this? And Lokadasha always wonders, because right now we have computer and we can actually carry so much. But for Prabhupada to travel through the world and then be able to write commentaries, and he would write these purports using the commentaries of all the previous teachers. So it's a great feat. So the Encyclopedia Britannica, in the book of the year
1992,
talks about the astonished academic and literary communities worldwide by writing and publishing 52 books on the ancient Vedic culture in the period from October 1968 to November 1975. And this is another one, the who's who of world religion, where it lists the significant people in the world religions, and Prabhupada is described in 1.5 pages.
Most of the other contributors, they're described, or personalities are described in half a column, but Prabhupada is described in 1.5 pages. So his impact was really felt.
This is really amazing. This is a book that was written of 75 extraordinary people who changed the world in the past century. And this is written by
Ira
Rifkin. And Prabhupada is mentioned under the category of they shook the things up. So Prabhupada definitely shook things a lot, because he challenged a lot of our status quo, our normal mode of thinking, and urged us to go past our conditioning and really make a change within. But he wasn't just a person who was interested in teaching us about personal salvation, but really wanted to change the world, because he saw the entire world as being part of Krishna. And so he knew that, and so one thing he says is one of his purposes is the re-spiritualization of human society.
And he did with so much compassion and love. One of the things that his disciples and followers appreciate most about him is his love, and how much he cared for each and every disciple. During the day, I don't know how he found the time. He would write tens and hundreds of letters. He would dictate these letters to his disciples, and his disciples would write letters to him asking about many weird things. Even like, I have this health problem, I'm having this cough, and Prabhupada would actually write remedies. You should take this with this with this with this, because he was a pharmacist, so he knew a lot of remedies that would help people. He would guide them about their children, how to raise children, how to resolve conflicts, how to run a center, how to print books, how to manage the money. I mean, he was running a worldwide movement, and wherever he would travel, he never had jet lag. I mean, we travel even a little bit, we get jet lag, right? He never had jet lag. Wherever he would go, he would start the same schedule. Like if he flew from India to America, then he would sleep at the same time in America as if he was in America. And he would wake up at the same time and never have any jet lag.
I mean, if one wants to understand spiritual leadership, or any leadership, like you were saying, one can actually study his life, because just to see that how one person, right, he basically did the impossible. He was on an impossible mission. Actually, before Prabhupada, there were some teachers who had gone to England to teach, this philosophy of bhakti. And as soon as they would say that, we have to follow these rules, they would say it's impossible. And another major contribution of Prabhupada was his ability to engage people irrespective of their gender. That is another huge contribution, because in traditional society from which Prabhupada came, the distinction between men and women was always there. But Prabhupada actually broke the boundaries on two major accounts. One was in reference to people born in the Western world, for them to be given this position of becoming greater than a Brahmana. That actually made the traditional Brahmanas in India very, very angry.
Mad.
They were really upset, because they felt that Prabhupada was not sticking to sort of the rigid, the caste system.
Or he was diluting the whole Vedic
culture.
culture.
And the other was, when Prabhupada came here, he encouraged his men and women disciples equally, and there was no distinction that, you as a woman, you cannot go and teach, or you're not allowed to do this, or you're not allowed.
You cannot become a leader or a manager of a temple or anything.
So these were two, there were many more, but these two things, just wanted to bring this up. That it's just, and again goes back to that same point, that being rooted in tradition, but being, but willing to make adjustments according to time, place, and circumstances. Thank you so much. This is a presentation that is a little different from what we've been doing so far, but it's so close to our heart, and we would like to hear your reflections.
And whenever you get time, please watch.
There are two. There is on Amazon. There is the Swami, the mantra. I always forget that. The name is so complex for me.
There are two documentaries.
One is an old one, and one is recent. This recent one was actually released in many theaters around the world.
That was the Hare Krishna, the movement that started the spiritual journey or something.
Yeah, if someone can give us the link.
It's available on Amazon.
Yes, if you can give us the link here, then we can share it with all of you.
Yeah, we saw this movie in your home, that Hare Krishna.
We want to share it with those.
Yeah, sure. I will send the link.
Yeah. So we want to just put you guys on gallery view here, and please, we'd like to hear from you, your questions, reflections, anything
or appreciation.
Yeah.
every time I read the Bhagavatam and I hear Prabhupada's purports, the way I can hear that passion coming through the book, the way he speaks, and that really, strikes my heart and gives me inspiration. So that's really, so I've never read any other, religious books which give so much impact in the way, even though I cannot hear him physically, but that his voice as if is coming through the books, very strongly in a passion.
Thank you.
And that's
Thank
something
you.
that I love, about the
Thank you.
books.
Thank you. Delia, do you have any thoughts or?
I don't know very much about Prabhupada, but I struggle a little bit with the disillusionment of like so many prominent spiritual figures. I'm kind of fighting that a little bit because I'm kind of like waiting, thinking like, oh, where's the sex scandal, or where's the racism going to come in, or where's the, whatever. So yeah.
Yeah, and that takes time, as we get to know more, and as we study the life more. And there is actually a nice video of this very big industrialist in India. His name is Srinath, Srinath ji, and he actually did the same experiment that you're talking about for 6 years. Because as a businessman, he says that in that, he says,
my business is to find a weakness in a person.
Because if I find a weakness, then I can exploit that person to my advantage, So he said, I tried very hard to find that weakness. So each one of us, we have to go through that journey on our own. And this is actually a very important duty of someone who's wanting to follow another person, is they should test. They should first test it. They should not follow blindly, and they should test that person for themselves and see that, is this person worth my trust and worth putting my faith in? Because faith is something that is very personal, and it is also something that is very tender. So it behooves us to have some doubt in the beginning so that we can make an educated decision on our own. So I appreciate that, Delia, that honesty.
Thank you. And I also remember you said something, I think it was last class, about like us being just very kind of like traumatized and wounded by material existence, that it becomes hard for us to trust and have that open heart also.
Yeah, absolutely. It is just part of our existence. And I personally think that it's not such a bad thing, because it allows us to really, see things for ourselves. And a tested faith is much better than an untested faith, because that will not hold up, in a time of crisis. So,
Ankur, your question, can you repeat it so that everybody can hear it?
Can we do this question at the end?
Okay.
Yeah. So anybody else?
I wanted to say one thing.
Yes, go ahead.
I was very impressed. I didn't realize before that Prabhupada was 69. When he started, sometimes, we are in this world so accustomed to people achieving things at young age that I'm only 49 and I already feel like, okay, the prime is gone. So it is actually very impressive to hear that he started at that age on such a big journey. That's really incredible.
Yeah, it's true. I think that's one of the things that more and more people realize as they grow older, that how do you start?
And then even on his deathbed, when he was, before leaving his body, he was like just a bag of bones. Even at that time, he was actually translating the books until his last breath. So that kind of shows that determination and dedication of his purpose, that he did not give up till the last moment.
Yeah, I would really encourage all of you to watch, this video. I think it'll help, especially, watching his last moments, because it is described, I think it was Socrates, I think, who said that you can tell how a person has lived his life. And Delia, this is something for you to consider as well, how they leave this world. That is actually because you can't fake it, everything else you can fake. So, when you see, and his last moments are actually on video. So when you see his focused consciousness, even till the last minute, it makes you realize that what we are looking at is not something that is flimsy.
He was actually giving strength to his disciples who were so distraught.
So anybody else? Let's see. Eric, did you have any thoughts? Deirdre, Divakar,
Yeah,
anybody?
I can say a few words.
Yeah, go ahead, Eric.
I mean, I think it's just going to be repeating things that you guys have already heard, but maybe not all the members of the group. Yeah, I'm always amazed at how dedicated Prabhupada was. There's no scandals or anything like that that I know of attached to him. So that makes him a real model among spiritual teachers in the United States. But unfortunately, the movement did go through some troubles after he died. So there was sort of a dark period. And I think it was the immigrants from India who really gave renewed strength to the movement. You know, this is what I've always been amazed at from the beginning. I think you guys don't give yourselves enough credit. I mean, you've done I mean, you know, I am familiar with many religious movements that began like in the 1960s and 1970s, and I don't think there's a single one that's as strong as the Hare Krishna movement, and it's due to the deep faith and the energy and the hard work of the Indian immigrants in this country, as well as some of the original disciples, like Lakshmi Van. You know, I mean, I always enjoy having him at the meetings, but it makes the movement unique. And you know, as I've said on many occasions in our Friday meetings, the key challenge is to somehow integrate the Indian immigrant community with the non-Indian community in America, and so everyone feels welcome and at home. And I think that these Zoom meetings are the most that you can do at the current time to try to make that happen. So I'm happy to be a part of it.
We're so happy to have you as part of our community also. And you're right that there'll always be, you know, especially when a great teacher leaves, sometimes there's confusion because there were so many young, immature people who are trying to figure things out. And definitely, you know, all over the world now we see that people are taking up the process and benefiting from it. And I think the other thing to consider is that it was never about Prabhupada. You know, it's his appearance day, so we are speaking about him. But really, the focus has always been in the knowledge, on the books, on the process. And so it's not a cult-based religion in that sense. Prabhupada is he considers himself a peon who's simply delivering the mail, and he always presented himself
and that's why this movement has become stronger and stronger even after he left. Typically when a charismatic leader leaves, then the whole movement or that organization kind of withers away. But Prabhupada was always about his teachers and Krishna, so
it was never about him. So anybody else?
Two things.
Yeah, Deirdre, go ahead.
Just to sort of piggyback on what Delia was saying regarding doubt. I just keep going back to what y'all presented in the first chapter as doubt being a sign of intelligence.
Yes.
And so if you don't seek validation, you're just sort of like, you're a sponge, basically. You're a parasite. And then secondly, I think another really important point is even when one's isolated, they don't feel lonely, even though they're alone. And I think that's a huge validation of being on a particular path that fits.
So beautiful, Deirdre. Beautiful. I have to say that too. Yes. And doubt is never a bad thing. You know, in fact, in the Bhagavatam, it is described that doubt is one of the ingredients of intelligence. So we should never, you know, see that as something that is a lacking. In fact, in our next 5th chapter, we're going to talk about this. Right?
Yeah, end of the 4th chapter.
Oh, end of 4th chapter, right? Yeah.
The link to the movie.
Yeah, thank you. Who else is there? Ankur will address your question in a minute if you have anything else. I know you are so much into leadership, and it's something that you are also a natural leader. So did you have any thoughts?
You know what the most previous discussion actually just got to me. A couple of things got to me. The poem about the river, you know, that got to me in the sense that you will encounter obstacles, maybe even also obstacles that determine your elimination. In the case of the river, elimination of life, but in what we normally encounter, elimination of love or elimination of a career or a project or something like that. It was really interesting that the river trusted God to lead him through that moment, and what seemed like a very unlikely scenario of him being absorbed in the clouds and having the wind transfer him. That was pretty miraculous, and maybe we have moments like that as well, where we just have to submit to God and ask for any sort of miracle or assistance or whatever it may be to get across the obstacle.
Yeah, that's very beautiful. I was also struck by the imagery, in that poem, about how just by allowing ourselves to be carried, because we fight so much and our mind fights so much, and I guess having that, it's a leap. It's a leap even for the river, right? To trust the wind and the air that will carry me across the desert. It's a leap.
Disperse me.
Yeah, or it won't disperse me. And that's where we struggle with it. And so as we go along in our spiritual paths, then these doubts will sort of dissipate, and we'll be able to give ourselves more freely. But that takes some time, because like Delia was saying, we have been traumatized in the past, and so we carry these doubts within, and so we just go along, and when we experience being carried, then that builds us up, right? Regarding the river confronting is the courage to go with the Tao. Yeah, the story. Thank you so much, Shweta. Thank you, Deirdre. Thank you. And if we gushed a little bit, please forgive us. It's just the day today for gushing, and our lives have been touched by Prabhupada, so we realize a bit of a gushing energy, but this is just what we wanted to share.
Have one more session on Prabhupada, because I thought it was not that enough.
I know. We also felt the same.
Yeah, we also felt that. Deirdre, it's so beautiful. Letting go of control. It's great. Gush on.
We can have a session with a couple of the videos played.
Oh yeah, we should watch we'll do a movie. Yeah, we'll do a movie night.
We'll have a movie night, a popcorn movie night with
Yes, we'll do that. Yes.
Oh,
yes.
sure.
We'll do that. Our teacher is Delia Mukunda Goswami. He's actually one of the first people who met Prabhupada at the Bowery. And when Prabhupada was chased by this drug addict, then Prabhupada went and knocked on Mukunda Maharaj. And Mukunda Maharaj was on his way, by the way, to becoming a great jazz musician at the time. And he later met George Harrison in England. So Prabhupada told these three couples, our teacher and his wife and two other couples, to just go off to England. And they went to England with no money. And they basically had $200 on them, and they used that same money to get into the country.
Like at that time, in order to get into UK, you had to have 200 pounds. So they only had 200 pounds. So one couple would enter UK, and then they would mail that money to the second couple, and then the second couple would enter like that.
And then they finally met George Harrison, and George Harrison then later donated the temple, the Bhaktivedanta Manor, which is the biggest temple in England now. And he actually gave the money for publication of the Krishna book, and the songs that he was very attracted to Prabhupada, and he would spend a lot of time. So some of these songs that later George Harrison wrote were personally inspired by his conversations with Prabhupada.
He wanted to become a disciple of Prabhupada, but Prabhupada said, no, you stay like this, you're doing actually more service without doing that. So this was Prabhupada's liberal nature.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji, Mataji. Do you know the Krishna book? So George Harrison paid $20,000 to help Srila Prabhupada print that book.
Yeah. Yeah, he did. Yes. He did. The Krishna book was something that he did. And so, yeah. So thank you so much. It's been a great evening.
We have to address Ankur's question.
Oh, yeah, Ankur's question. Go ahead.
So your question is, because equanimity in failure seems to be particularly hard in spiritual progress to make, how can we achieve it? Equanimity in failure, basically, right?
Yeah.
In life or in spiritual life?
I think in life, because well, both. I mean, really both.
Mm. Yeah, the equanimity is actually it's something that comes from maturity, it comes from knowledge, it comes from maturity of our spiritual practice, and also it comes from seeing the failure not as a failure but as an opportunity to grow and learn, and seeing the failure as an arrangement of Krishna. Like Prabhupada, I mean, the kind of failures he encountered, I mean, when you read his biography, you will see that it's impossible for any sane human being to overcome those like string of difficulties and failures that he encountered. But seeing them as he always saw them as Krishna's arrangement, and that allowed him to actually embrace those failures as part of his journey. So there are so many things we could say about this.
Yeah, I think it's a matter of being deep. Just like, if you have a little puddle, then the puddle becomes dry if there's no rain, and it overflows or gets flooded when there is even a little bit of rain. But the ocean, on the other hand, even if it rains a lot, it does not, it doesn't affect it. Or when there is no rain, it's not affected. So what's the difference between a puddle and an ocean? The difference is that the ocean is just deep and it's vast. So our consciousness right now is very, it's sort of, it's become small, right? Even though, so we want to expand our consciousness. We want to make our consciousness spiritual. And there is no, the way we do that is again through these spiritual practices. As we do it, you will see it within yourself, that your ability to handle provocative situation and your ability to let go, because you will develop this this higher perspective. And when you see things from a higher perspective, then things are never as bad as they seem, and they're never as good as they seem.
I mean, so it's not just equanimity in failure, but also equanimity in success.
That's the harder one.
That's the harder one, actually.
Yeah, the hardest thing is, equanimity in success. It gets to us. So in both situations, you'll see that you will actually be able to do it. The best course is, and we can, again, it's based on our own personal experience, is the transcendental sound vibration. Three things: our chanting, our constantly sharpening the saw of our intelligence by spiritual subject matter and spiritual knowledge, and the third is being in the association of those that are also trying to refine themselves.
And also being in the mode of service. That really helps us to overcome, because failure also becomes an opportunity to there's always an opportunity to serve, regardless of what we encounter, failure or success.
And failure is simply, it means that we are not there yet.
Yeah.
And so when Prabhupada, when he would encounter failure, he just saw it as like just another way for him to show that he means business, right? And just, staying on with it, depending and trusting Krishna. So.
Deidre, congratulations for finishing your first 16 rounds. Was that true?
Yes, it just took me a really long time. That's why I was fumbling with my phone and I couldn't speak.
No, that's amazing. Amazing.
That's amazing.
That's congratulations.
It took a long time, but yeah, I was not going to stop because it was funny yesterday. I shouldn't have stopped after 20 minutes because then I was just sitting there with all this energy. So this morning it was like, no, I'm going to do it. I have a question. How do you count how many rounds? I took a box of matches and I put sticks out every time I finished one. And I did 8, and then I went backwards and put them back in the box.
The beads and the counter beads.
You have the chanting beads, right?
Yes, but I mean, like...
So we also have an additional counter.
So you hold as you go to count your 16?
No. There are additional, there's another smaller bead. There's a smaller string of beads, which are called the counter beads.
So there are only 16 there.
There are only 16 there.
I think I like my matchsticks.
Yeah, you can use anything.
You can use anything. But we can send it to you, maybe. Yeah. Let us know and then we can send it.
Well, I need to order the actual kit.
Yeah, just order the
one because I have these little ones and I know my cat's gonna take off with them, or the dogs.